Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. It's such a crazy time. My hats are off to each of you who were able to join today. It's between testing and all the different end-of-school year festivities that go on. I'm really honored to have you and value your time. So happy to share with you a little bit more about project-based learning. I don't know if many of you were here. Our last month's webinar was sort of an introduction to project-based learning. Jamie had done that one, and this is a follow-up to that one. We'll revisit some of those main concepts of creating project-based learning and making it work for you, but really we want to get pretty practical here and actually share 2 projects with you that hopefully you can take and make your own in your own classrooms. So let's get started. As Robin mentioned, we'll talk about those hallmarks of project-based learning, just so you have a sense of what are the things that need to be in something called a project-based learning unit, so that if you want to create your own, you have some tools to do that. And then I'll share these 2 projects. And I think it's really important to share, in general, kind of how the project works. How do you go about it? What are the kids doing over the course of several lessons? But then also the next part of the agenda, and we'll work that into each project, is what are those cross-curricular content connections that you can make with that project? So for me, project-based learning, really what makes it so powerful is that you can start with an engaging experience that really engages students in something that maybe makes the world a better place. You're really tapping into their innate desire to contribute to their world, but yet you have all this content you have to teach, right? You have science standards and social studies standards and English standards, depending on what grade level you are or what content area. So it's important to think about how can we use that experience of a project to then connect to all the content that you actually have to teach. So I'll give you some cross-curricular content connections. That's a lot of C's. To think about, but also that's where I'll have you guys brainstorm as well, because based on your grade level or what standards you need to be teaching, you might find other connections that you can make as well. So that's what we have in store, and we will be mindful of time, as I said. Thank you guys for joining, and I think teacher time is infinitely more valuable than other people's time, so we make sure we end by 4:30. So looking at those hallmarks, really the kind of most go-to resource for thinking about project-based learning is the Buck Institute, and we're big fans of them. So I just want to walk you through their framework if you haven't seen it before. And basically what they look at are, they call gold standard PBL. And I actually like that they call it gold standard because, well, not that any teacher doesn't want to be anything but gold standard, but know that you don't have to do all of these every time to do PBL. Feel free to start small, start with something, little piece that you can do. But if you want a picture of what a really high-quality project-based learning unit would look like, it would have all these things. So it starts in the middle. You have certain learning goals. Those are what I was calling the cross-curricular content connections. What's the academic skills that you need to convey? So that's there in the background, but the actual project experience starts there on the kind of upper left with a challenging problem or question. So you have something that is a real problem that needs to be solved, a real question that means something to the students to answer. The next piece of it there is sustained inquiry. So this is something that is really tough because, as I said, teacher time is so valuable and so limited that it's hard to make time for this. But the whole point of project-based learning is to sustain an inquiry over a period of time. And I'll give you a little anecdotal example. We work with, are partnered up with the Andel Research Institute, and I've talked to a lot of the scientists there. They're science researchers. And their investigations, their questions that they're answering are on a magnitude of decades. Right? They're answering one question over 10, 20 years. So, I mean, how many times do we have the opportunity to give students anything other than a one-day, maybe a one-week project? So, it just begs the question, are we really preparing them for the types of careers where they have to have this sort of sustained inquiry and perseverance? So I just make that little reference under sustained inquiry to kind of value that. The third component there is authenticity. So there has to be some sort of authenticity that is relevant to the student's life. This is just what we simply call making the world a better place. I think, it's one thing to just do a project for fun, and you can have a lot of good reasons for doing that. But for me, project-based learning at its best, it involves students in some sort of authentic issue that is meaningful to them. The next one is student voice and choice. And this is always good to think about in terms of a continuum. It's not like sometimes people look at that and think, oh my gosh, my kids have to come up with the project and come up with the whole plan for it and come up with every aspect of it. And that's certainly not the case, right? Just look for small areas. Maybe they will just sort of choose how they're going to display their public product. Maybe they're just going to, just decide what kind of graph they're going to use, a pie chart versus a bar graph, right? So you can make small choices and then work your way up to larger and larger choices once students prove that they can do that, right? Once they earn your trust and they build their confidence with some choice. The next piece is reflection. I think this is a really key one, and it's one that we often skip over, but I really believe most learning happens not in actually hearing about it, not even actually doing about it, but in reflecting. What do I think about that? Why might that have happened? What would I do differently? Those sorts of questions really prompt you to kind of transfer what you learned into something that's going to stick with you. The next one is critique and revision. So there's always an opportunity to, and I'll show you this on the next slide, but we call fix it up, basically to revise things, to get feedback, to learn from others. And then finally, have a public product. I think this is a really key hallmark of project-based learning, is that the goal is not just to display something that you learned for your teacher, but to display it for, kind of going back to that authenticity piece, an authentic audience. And I think about that in terms of engagement, right? If you are presenting, if students are presenting something to their teacher, it offers, a pretty low level of engagement. Let's say you bump that up a notch and bring parents into the class. It ups the engagement a little bit. Maybe you bring in some school officials, it ups it a little bit more. Maybe you bring in some city or state officials, right? So the more you get kind of outside the school building in a way, and outside the students' lives, kind of the higher the engagement goes in terms of their displaying and presenting their work as a public product. So if you want more on that, I encourage you to visit the Buck Institute's website. That's kind of, like I said, it's the gold standard PBL, but it's also the gold standard even in professional development for PBL. But what we thought was, how do we translate that into kind of a lesson plan or something that I can actually, kind of use as a template to create my own projects. So that's what we sort of tried to do, is think of how do we put all of that into our own approach to PBL. And what we came up with was this sort of lesson sequence or project sequence. We start with a compelling question, something that's going to engage the students. And we always have this sequence of events, and lessons fit into this sequence. So start with why, so the students have an understanding of why this is important, immediately grab their attention with that relevance piece. Then they have a chance to think it through, learn what they need to learn in order to conduct the project. Then they work it out. Then they do the project, right? They will create the, whatever it is they're going to do, and we'll show you some examples. And then that fix it up. That's that piece where they have a chance to revise and edit based on feedback. And then share their awesome, share their hard work with a public, with an authentic audience. And what we've done is incorporate into that sequence, that just is a way to organize a project so that we can kind of think of what we would do to kind of go through that sequence, but then make sure the following options are also incorporated wherever they fit best into that sequence. So that's collaboration options. And by that, I mean, there's kind of two ways we like to incorporate collaboration. One is obviously the students within the class, but also if we can get students collaborating with other students who are maybe doing a similar project in a different class, maybe in the same school, but maybe in the same town or city, or maybe even across the country or across the world. I mean, it's a really great opportunity. Again, builds that engagement as students can work with other classmates across in a different setting. And then the other piece of that is real-world connections. That's our way of kind of bringing in that authenticity piece. And what we do here is, this is where I kind of think of it two ways. Bringing experts in, so bringing the world to your students, right? So having them here, I would think about, it's amazing to me how something has so much more credibility, if you've ever noticed this, when someone else says it than when you as the teacher say it. Also as parents it happens too, I suppose. So bringing in someone who's an expert in the field just brings additional credibility to yourself as kind of their facilitator of learning and to the content itself. But also it's bringing your students to the world, right? Sharing out their work in a public product. And then, as I mentioned, cross-curricular content. So making those connections, not teaching, even if you do teach maybe just one content area, let's say you're a middle school or high school teacher and you only teach science, thinking about how you can bring in other content areas so that there's a more well-rounded kind of approach to what you're teaching. But even within your content, so let's say you're teaching life science, but could you bring in an element of earth science or an element of physical science to try to really broaden the way the students are looking at the content. So that's kind of some of those hallmarks, trying to look at, what is PBL, what does the research say PBL is, and how do we sort of internalize that ourselves and build our projects around this particular template. So now I'll walk through one, and each of the, I'm going to go through 2 projects, and they are available as in sort of a project overview as downloads, so those should be in your downloadable resources. And I'll go through the first one. It's called Food for Thought. And we always like to start our projects with literally it's a door sign, something to hang on the door when the students come in that might just sort of get them thinking about what are we going to do here, you know? In this case, this one's Food for Thought, and the door sign says, when given the choice, which would you choose? Your fate is in your hands. And so I'll walk you through. As I mentioned, we have this sequence to start with why, think it through, work it out, fix it up, and share your awesome. And in this case, we have 8 lessons that go across this. And I can't emphasize enough, like we want to provide a framework for how you could do this, but our goal is that every teacher implements this in their own way. We say we're going to give you the tools and resources, and you just bring personality. So think about what works for you. But I'll walk you through each of these lessons and then kind of show you some pictures of how that looks like, and then the content connections, and then we'll go on to the next project. So in this one, to start with why, again, we'd like to start with something kind of, you know, try to engage the students. And this one starts with sort of a fun game. So why nutrition matters. We actually pass out different color-coded cards, and the kids are thinking, you know, why is mine green? Why is his red? We ask them to think about what that might mean, what the colors might represent. Well, it turns out they represent sort of the statistic likelihood of getting different diseases that are nutritionally related. So, you know, half the class of 4th graders dies of heart disease. So that's a little bit morbid, but thinking about it in terms where they kind of see, you know, a little bit of the roulette kind of nature of the way diseases affect society. And they see that this actually has, you know, nutrition has a role to play in your own mortality and in the mortality of the people you love. So that's our kind of attention getter, start why nutrition matters. Then we move on to think it through, and we have a series of 3 lessons here. So the first one we call sort of food, and the kids just bring in different foods from home, and we ask them to sort it on a healthy track, right? Healthy or not healthy, kind of put it on a continuum. And then we give them some resources. Let's go look up, you know, websites like choosemyplate.gov. And then after that information, they have a chance to kind of resort their food based on what they learn. It's also a nice time to bring in lesson 3 here is the great GMO debate. So talking about GMOs, we provide some videos you can watch around, or you can find your own, on you know, the role of GMOs and kind of pros and cons of those. So it gets students sort of thinking critically around some sort of hot topic items. And then lesson 4, we thought it was a great opportunity to bring in some math. So we do some work with nutrition with a little pun on some. So we have just some activities they can do with the nutrition label itself. So we've got some math there. Then now it's time for them to actually do what the project is about. So now that they know a little bit about nutrition, they need to create a recipe book. So they're going to create, as a class, different recipes, and they're going to put that together in a recipe book that they will then publish and sell. And maybe you can have the proceeds go to something like Healthy Kids USA or whatever charity around nutrition that you and your kids decide on. So lesson 5 is really about, you know, getting them to think creatively about what that recipe could look like. And then lesson 6 is a chance to actually build those recipes in class and have the students kind of do like a Top Chef competition. So the students walk around and evaluate each of the recipes based on taste and on nutrition. And then, as we said, we always want to have that iterative thinking part. So when we get to the Fix It Up stage, we have our Top Chef revisions. Here's where the students will kind of, they put on their chef hats again, and they just look back at their recipes and make any changes to them based on what they learned from their Top Chef competition. And then finally, in this one, we have lesson 8 here, the Friends and Family Feast. So we've been sending out invitations all along here, and we invite the friends and family to come in and sample some of the healthy foods that the kids have created. And what we suggest there is that maybe the parents actually donate to the cause as well, but then after that they can publish their recipes, or maybe they can sell their recipe books at that family feast. So that'll give you just a sense of, like I said, we kind of broke this up into 8 lessons. There's lots of different ways you could do this, but that kind of hopefully gives you an idea of what you could do with your students. And something like this really works at any grade level. You could do this as young as, you know, primary grades and as old as high school. Where that really comes into play is what's the content that you're going to connect, right? So if we said work with math, in the younger grades you might be doing simple addition. In the upper grades you might be using that information around the, you know, to work on more higher level math skills. So let me take you through, just kind of show you a little bit. We did this with our class, and our author teacher had provided some pictures from his class that he did this with. So sometimes it's just nice to see, you know, with real kids, sort of looking at what they did and how it looked. So kids had a great time with it. And as I mentioned, it's not just about having that great time, but how can we teach what we need to teach? So here are some content connections that we suggest with this, aimed more at kind of like a middle or a later elementary level, but depending on what you're teaching, you could switch these around. But you could see how with this one, with English language arts, you could easily write an explanatory text, because essentially a recipe is an explanatory text. You can talk about different text features. You can talk about bulleted lists and that sort of thing. Social studies, this was, we thought, a great place to bring in the role of science and technology, which is the social studies standards, particularly as you look at that GMO piece. For math, with recipes, it's a great place to kind of introduce equivalent fractions, right? You have lots of fractions in recipes. For science, it's a great way to think about what's happening in our brains as we are looking at this food, tasting this food, smelling this food. So what's happening with sensory information, how our brain is processing that information. And then the other thing I would encourage you to do is, often we think of those as the 4 content areas, but we've actually added in social and emotional learning as a content area and looked at the CASEL standards and chosen different topics from SEL to focus on. And this one, it was a great place to sort of do a little mini lesson on self-awareness and self-management. But I like thinking about SEL as a content area, no matter what grade you teach. I know it can be harder with high school. You feel like they should know this stuff already. But in some ways, that's your last chance to sort of get them before they go out in the world and make sure, you have a chance to sort of teach these. And if you have an authentic context like this to teach them in, it makes it a little bit, less just weird. So now I want you to think about this project. Like I've told you how we kind of structured it and how we connected it to content areas and to different real-world connections. So maybe you can brainstorm a little bit yourself here and write in the chat box, what other content connections can you make? If you did this project based on your grade level, what sort of content area standards or topics would you hit? And what sort of real-world connections could you make? What sort of experts would you be willing to bring into your classroom? All right, I like that suggestion of art class to design a menu. I love that idea. That sounds really good. I think one thing I forgot to mention was a real-world connection. We could bring in, just bring in a nutritionist to talk to the class, computer class to help with design. Yeah. I also thought for this one, an opinion writing piece on, like what's the role of government, say, in keeping its society nutritious, nutritionally sound. Focus on cultural foods. That could be a lot of fun. You could bring in all sorts of different social studies standards. Excellent, excellent. All right, I'm going to move on to the next project and give you that overview as well. As I mentioned, most of everything I said here is on that downloadable project overview, as well as a few more ideas as well. So the next one is called Moments to Remember. And this one, here's the door sign for this one. Capture a life story before it slips away. Again, a little morbid. We got a little morbid theme, I guess. But this one may not be as readily, capture the student's attention the way some of our other projects do, but it gets them thinking, what does that mean? And because they don't necessarily think about their own mortality or their loved one's mortality. So this one's about working with the elderly. So I'll walk you through this project. Again, it follows the same sort of, project structure and sequence. So for Start With Why, this is really important on this one. As I said, it's not necessarily, innate to them why they should be doing this. But in this project, I'll give you just an overview first. The kids, they are going to be partnered with some senior friends from maybe a retirement home in your community. And they get to interview them and learn more about them, and they end up writing a biography and creating a book that tells that senior friend's life. And then they come back and show their senior friend their biography book, their little heirloom book, and they actually also help them get on technology and on social media and share their book with some of their loved ones. So that's kind of an overview of the project. We break it out this way. First, you definitely have to introduce sort of aging, compassion, and empathy, right? So we have a great book called Wilfred Gordon MacDonald Partridge by Mem Fox, and I love her work. So it's kind of an older book by her. I hadn't seen it before, but it's perfect for this. It's just a great way of showing in a very, sort of student-friendly way, although I would say I'm a huge fan of using picture books with high school students as well. So if you teach older grades, don't shy away from using picture books. They absolutely love it. Anyway, it's a great book for introducing kind of those concepts of aging and compassion and empathy. And then the next lesson, you're preparing for your senior center visit. Or the teacher that we actually had do this with us, she had the seniors kind of bust into them, the retirement home bust the seniors into the school, which might work out a little easier even. So in this case, we would show them some videos, maybe bring in some experts even to kind of talk about what is it like when you're talking to seniors, even just little things. You might have to repeat yourself. Just things to kind of prepare them. It's always great to bring in somebody to talk about that. And talk about that they're going to really be making the world a better place by partnering with a senior friend and writing a biography of their new friend's life, right? You've really added some good into the world. So just prepping them for that visit. The third one is the meeting with your senior friend. And we like to kind of make that fun. So we took a beach ball and wrote little kind of, just sort of icebreaker questions on it, what's your favorite food or whatever. And so they would throw the beach ball from the kids to the seniors, and they would, turn it to wherever they landed, whatever question they were on, and answer that question. Just a way to get them talking to each other and break the ice. And in that lesson as well, the kids will have looked at and created some questions to ask their senior friends. So they conduct basically an interview with them. And it's things, everything from what's your, favorite color to did you get an allowance, so just getting to know them and a little bit more about their life and collecting the notes that they're going to need in order to write this biography. So then lesson 4, now they're thinking it through, right? So now they are going to write their pen pal. So they might write letters back and forth, and this is where you want to work out with that retirement home kind of facilitator. Hey, how many times you're going to write back and forth? But they can then share those letters with the senior friends and back and forth to get a little bit more information. Then you start to think about how are we actually going to do this. So thinking it through, we explore the genre of biography. We'll look at some sample biographies. This is also a nice time to look at, from a social studies standpoint, what was going on in the world over the last, say, 50, 60 years, so the kids have a little better understanding of the stories that their senior friends were talking about. Then they start to write their biography. And in this case, we really encourage them to use themes to structure a biography. It's just a little bit more challenging. It requires a little bit more creative and critical thinking to use theme as the structure for biography instead of just a straight chronological one. So maybe a theme might be overcoming obstacles or love of family, something like that. So you have to think about what really ties this person's life together. So then they write the biography, and then working on Fix It Up, they will, kind of peer edit those, and then they go back to the senior center or meet their senior friends again to share this, because they actually create a book, a physical book that looks really nice, and you can use washi tape to make it look pretty. And then they share the book with them, and like I said, they get them online to share their stories with some of their loved ones through social media. So, and for some reason my video didn't play here, and we're probably short on time anyway. So there's a video of our senior friends and our students kind of meeting one another and doing this project, at least the first part of it. So we will include that in the email that we used as a follow-up. So I will have that for you then. But just a quick overview of the potential content areas you could teach with this. So as I mentioned, theme with English language arts. Social studies comes pretty easily with this one to look at, life in different eras. So, how much did the movies cost for them versus now? Math is a great one to use number sense and equivalent fractions. You could do that by using sort of a life timeline for your senior friends, right? What were they doing at a third of their life, right? This was kind of a fun one sometimes it's hard to work these in, but we got creative with science and thought about what if we partner our senior friends and our students around the same month, to have the same birth month. So when they come back, you can tell them, that despite being 60 years difference in their birth, the night sky was actually the same on those, whether it was January, February, whatever. So they learn patterns of the night sky that way. And again, we have our social emotional learning, which this one is really right for, with relationship skills and social awareness. So we'll take a minute or two here to think about how could you use this in your classroom. How could you tie this particular lesson to the content that you need to teach, and what sort of real-world connections might you make with this? I love that idea of the timeline with what was going on in the world versus the seniors, what's going on in their life. That could be really fun to juxtapose those two. All right, so our goal here was really just to share with you a couple of projects that we think will help you be memorable to your students, help provide them an experience that they won't forget and that they can learn from. So take the project overview, make it your own, run with that. If you are interested in kind of looking at getting the actual kind of kit of supplies and all the resources with sort of videos to those real-world connections and some sort of mini lessons and some of the content that you just have to go searching for the web for, but if you don't want to spend the time searching for that, these are what our Blue Apple projects are all about. So each of our Blue Apple projects will include, and these are 2 of them, all the project plan and supplies, the content area connections, so mini lessons around those sort of topics that I mentioned here. It'll have also some short professional development videos so you can apply what you're doing in this project to the rest of your practice. It also gives some ideas for collaboration, and as I mentioned, those real-world content connections in terms of videos and contact information for people who are willing to Skype into your classroom, come into your classroom. So that's what you would get with these projects, and if you're interested in that, you can go to blueappleteacher.org. These will be launching in August, but you can go there now and get on the list to say that you're interested. And when we launch in August, we will go through that list and pick a winner for a project to get a free project. So that's all I have for you today. As we said, there's some downloads there to look at for those project overviews, and we'll send an email with that fun little video of the moments to remember. Other than that, we would encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and follow what's going on at VAEI. Let us know what you'd like to hear more of in these webinars, because we definitely want to share with you information that you're looking for. So thanks so much for joining us.